So last week we started on Old Testament prophecies. We talked about how the sins of Israel drove God to have to summon the Assyrians and then the Babylonians to carry first northern Israel and then Judah off into captivity, into the exile. And then we talked a little bit about the prophecies related to how long the exile would last and when the wall would start to be rebuilt. So now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the amazing prophecies of Daniel. I want to talk about today the ones that are related to the exile and the reformation of Israel and the construction of the wall. He also had some amazing prophecies about the birth of Jesus, the Messiah. We're going to talk about those next week, because next week the topic is going to be Messianic prophecy. So we'll start with Daniel. When Babylon went and captured and defeated Egypt in 605, on their way back to Assyria, they stopped in Jerusalem and they took captive many of the leaders of Jerusalem and some of the most promising youngsters, the teenagers, and took them with them to Babylon. And Daniel was one of those captives that went back in 605 BC. And while he was there, he through his wisdom and insight and the blessings of God, he gained favor with the court of the king and became an advisor to the king. So that put him in a position to make a number of prophecies, some related to visions that Nebuchadnezzar had, others related to other issues. So we're going to talk about those. The first one is going to be Nebuchadnezzar's vision of the world's rulers, how the world rulers would evolve into four kingdoms, and it's pretty insightful and pretty clear. Then we're talking about the fall of Babylon, the return to Jerusalem, the reconstruction of the wall, and next week we'll talk about the birth and death of the Messiah. And he also has some prophecies in Daniel, or in his book, about the end times. They get very convoluted, and it's kind of like reading Revelation, but it matches with Revelation pretty quickly, or pretty closely, so I'm not going to talk very much about that today. So if you look at the timeline of Daniel, he was taken captive, I said, in 605 BC. He was he was prophesying at the same time as Ezekiel. They were in the same area at the same time. He was there through the time when Nebuchadnezzar conquered Judah and carried them off to Babylon. Went all the way through. He lived through the time when Cyrus captured Babylon and became the king, and decreed that the Jews should be allowed to rebuild Jerusalem. And then Daniel died just about the time that the first Jewish convoy was going to go rebuild the temple. So he was there through the entire 70-year period of the exile. And that means that he was probably, since he was a teenager or maybe 20 when he was a captive, he lived to be about 90, and his entire adult life was in Babylon. So just to kind of summarize that, from what can be gleaned from history and some things, as I said, the Babylon captivity, that was actually 605. After he had been in the court of Babylon for about 3 years, Nebuchadnezzar had his dream about the future world leaders, and we're going to talk about that. There was an issue we're going to talk about, some prophecies about related to Nebuchadnezzar's pride. He was very prideful, and as we're going to see, God invoked a judgment on him, and he was actually insane for 7 years, and lived like an animal. But because his family was so powerful, and he was such a powerful king, they held the position of king open for him, and he regained his sanity and resumed his kingship. So we're going to then go on. After that, in about 556 BC, he had the vision of 4 beasts that we're going to talk about. Then he had Daniel himself had a vision about the ram and a goat that had implications of world history. And then Babylon fell to the Persians in 539, and Daniel had a vision of the captivity the exile was about to end. I'm sorry, the vision, that's the 70 weeks there, refers to his vision of the Messiah coming into Jerusalem. So near the end of his life, one of his most important visions, and was the vision of the Messiah making his journey on Palm Sunday into Jerusalem. So you've all read about, I'm sure, Nebuchadnezzar's dream. He had a dream that disturbed him, and he summoned all of his magicians and enchanters and sorcerers and astrologers, and I guess it's quite an army of people, and said, "Tell me what my dream means." And they basically said, "Well, tell us what the dream is, and we'll tell you what it means." He says, "No, you're not going to get away with that. I'm not going to tell you what my dream was." So again, it says, tell your servants the dream, and the king said, "This is what I have firmly decided. I will not tell you what the dream was and interpret it. I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble if you don't tell me." So he's not the best manager of people, I guess.
No kidding.
So anyway, the king got to the point where he sent his army out to kill all the astrologers and the advisors and everything, and one of them got to Daniel, and Daniel says, "Well, let me talk to the king, and we'll figure this out." And Daniel went and prayed, and God gave him a revelation, and so he went before the king, and he said, O king, you saw and beheld a great image. The great image whose brightness was excellent stood before thee, and the form therefore was terrible. And then this was the statue image that he saw had 4 layers. The top of the statue, the head was gold, the breast and the arms were silver, his belly and thighs were brass, and his legs were iron that were standing in a part clay. And then he interpreted what it meant for what the dream meant, and he put in some more detail. He said the king saw that till a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon the feet, and the feet of clay, and that everything broke down and tumbled into a pile of rubble on the ground. And what he went on to say is that you're seeing the prophecy related to 4 kingdoms that are going to be worldwide kingdoms that are going to rule the world. The top gold was Babylon. The silver, it turns out, was the Medo-Persians, because they're the ones that captured Babylon and took their place. Then, several hundred years later, the Greeks invaded and captured everything. And finally, the Romans captured all that region in 31 BC. And Daniel said, the shattering of the statue by the rock, excuse me, without human hands represents the kingdom of God, which will replace the kingdoms of men. Okay. And then he said, I didn't define this purpose or these events by myself. It was God in heaven who revealed the secrets. Now, he didn't specifically say that the Medo-Persians and the Greeks and the Romans were going to be the empires that succeeded each other, but he did say those empires would succeed one another, and these were the characteristics, and it turns out he was absolutely right. Now, there's another dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, and he said he looked out and he saw an enormous tree, and it's truly enormous. It grew large and strong, and its top touched the sky. Its leaves were beautiful, and it was food. There were food for the animals underneath. And then he said he heard a loud voice, cut down the tree and trim all the branches, strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee from under it. But let the stump and its roots bound with iron and bronze remain in the ground in the field of grass. Let him be drenched with the dew of heaven, and let him live with the animals among the plants of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let him be given the mind of an animal, till 7 times pass for him. So the 7 times means 7 years. And basically he's having a dream that involves someone losing their mind and having the mind of an animal. So Daniel tells him, after he's consulted, you are the tree. You have become great and strong, and your greatness has grown until it reaches the sky, and your dominion extends to the distant parts of the earth. This is the interpretation, Your Majesty, and this is the decree that Most High has issued against my lord the king. You will be driven away from people and will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like the ox and be drenched with the dew of heaven. 7 times will pass by you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms of earth and gives them to everyone he wishes. So the command to leave the stump of the tree with its roots means that your kingdom will be restored to you when you acknowledge that heaven rules. Therefore, Your Majesty, please accept my advice. Renounce your sins by doing what is right. So he was very, very prideful. And about a year later, as Daniel records it, as the king was walking on the roof of the royal palace in Babylon, he said, is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence, by my mighty power and by the glory of my majesty? So he's very, very prideful. And then, even as the words were on his lips, as Daniel records it, a voice came from heaven. This is what is decreed for you, King Nebuchadnezzar. Your royal authority has been taken from you, and you will be driven away from the people, and will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like the ox. 7 times will pass until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms. Now, this is a passage, part of Daniel, that was greeted with great skepticism for a very long time. And somewhere about 1960, archaeologists found a tablet buried in the ruins of Babylon that records some issues that Nebuchadnezzar was having with people relationships and mental acuity. And the phrasing and everything of it that's been translated indicates that it's consistent with the narration that Nebuchadnezzar was insane for about 7 years. And the condition that he had, where he has the mind of an animal is rare, but it's recorded with other psychologists, and all the details that are there are consistent with what Daniel has to say about how he behaved. So it's not conclusive evidence, but it's something that says that something was not right with Nebuchadnezzar, and there are gaps in the records of the court for several years while he was king. So people are beginning to say this is not necessarily a fairy tale. As Christians in the Bible, of course we believe it, but it's just another one of those amazing things that you would never think about. Now, another prophecy of Daniel is the handwriting on the wall. If you remember, when the fall of Babylon, the Medes and Persians had completely surrounded Babylon, and Babylon was under the impression they were totally impregnable. They had these walls that were 300 feet high and 80 feet thick, and there was no way to get in that they could recognize. And during the night, one night, the army of the Chaldeans and Persians blocked the river, the Euphrates River, that went through the middle of Babylon. And normally it would be flowing so furiously that no one could use that to get into the city. But in one night, excuse me, they blocked the river, and they were able to send their army in through the openings in the wall that let the river through. And then they captured the city in one night. Now, apparently, on the same night, Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, Belshazzar, was holding a big party in the castle. And it was going to be one of those biblical parties where it lasts 2 weeks. People bring everything they need for 2 weeks. And they were having a grand time. And they had so many people, they ran out of cups, apparently. So he said, well, we need something to drink from. Why don't you go get the holy utensils that we captured from the temple in Jerusalem and bring them in. So they brought them in. They started drinking from those utensils. And then all of a sudden, a mysterious hand appeared and started writing on the wall. And they called Daniel. No one else could read it because it was written apparently in Hebrew or some early language. And he could read it, and he said, your kingdom is at an end. You're going to be wiped out soon. It turned out that very night, he was killed when the army, the opposing army, came in through the waterway openings in the wall. And those events are well documented. The people in the Middle East at that time frame took meticulous records of what was going on, and the kings particularly recorded all their events. So everything that had to do with the capture of Babylon was recorded. And that night, the Persians destroyed Babylon. Now, another vision, this was Daniel's own vision, and he had a vision of a goat with a very prominent horn, and the horn is a sign of strength, so it means a very strong goat came out of the west and crossing the whole earth without touching the ground, and it came upon a two-horned ram, and it basically destroyed the ram, as we'll see. and the ram was powerless to stand against it. The goat knocked it to the ground and trampled it, and no one could rescue the ram. Okay, so the all right, what's going on here? Okay, I think we have a computer failure here. Okay, here we go. So the goat in Daniel's vision became very great, but at the height of its power, the large horn was broken off. That means its power was broken. In this place, 4 prominent horns grew up toward the 4 winds of heaven. Okay. Now Daniel was perplexed by the dream, and the Bible says that an angel came to explain it to him. And the ram that you saw with the 2 horns represent the kings of Media and Persia. Those were the conquerors of Babylon. Okay. The shaggy goat represents the kingdom of Greece, and the large horn that is between its eyes is the first king. Okay. It turns out to be Alexander the Great was the goat with the great power. The broken horn and the 4 horns that arose in its place represent 4 kingdoms which will arise from his nation, although not with his power. Okay. So what happened was Alexander the Great invaded the Middle East and conquered the people who had conquered Babylon. Okay, so the 2 powers that constituted the empire that had destroyed Babylon were in turn captured. But as you know, at a very young age, he died suddenly. And he had 4 generals who couldn't agree with each other very well. So they wound up dividing the kingdom that Alexander the Great had conquered into 4 regions, and they each took a region. So it was Macedonia, what is today Syria and Babylonia, and then Thrace in Asia Minor, and then Egypt and Arabia. And they later started warring with each other, and as recorded in history. So they wound up involving Cleopatra and Anthony and all those folks eventually. Now what's interesting is when Alexander the Great invaded the Middle East, he had on his mind to destroy all the empires and the kingdoms that existed there. And that included plans to conquer and destroy Jerusalem. But both the Talmud and Flavius Josephus, who was a historian in that period, described what happened in that time. During the march, when he was marching on Jerusalem, Alexander the Great had a vision in a dream that a man would meet him as he approached Jerusalem, clothed in white. And during the dream, he got the impression he was supposed to be favorable to that person. Okay. And in Jerusalem, what happened then is Alexander's army was approaching Jerusalem. The high priest was trying to figure out what to do. What should Jerusalem's response be to the Alexander the Great approaching? And the high priest decided, I'm going to wear my white vestments and march out as a representative of the Lord, and just greet him. And everybody in Jerusalem expected they would all be killed and that the walls would be knocked down and everything. And so the high priest marched out, and to his great surprise, when Alexander saw him, he bowed down to him and offered friendship rather than following through on the plans to destroy Jerusalem. So later, it's recorded in several places that the high priest and his staff showed Alexander all the scrolls that were generated by Daniel, predicting Alexander's being a world conqueror and coming in and destroying people that destroyed Babylon and everything. So, and there's some historical archives, like I said, in several places that Daniel was just absolutely shocked that all these prophecies about him were there and were proven. And the fact that the priest met him in a way that matched his dream, kept them from destroying Jerusalem.
Wow. That's interesting.
Now, there are several, moving on from Daniel, there are several things in the Bible that refer to the scattering of the Jews. And it turns out, of course, it's happened twice. It happened in the era of 700 BC and then later 580 BC, when first Israel, the northern kingdom, and then Judah were taken into captivity and scattered. And then it happened again when the Romans captured Jerusalem and really scattered everybody. So we're going to look at a few of those. In Deuteronomy, it says, "Then the Lord will scatter you among the peoples, all peoples, from one end of the earth to the other, and there you will serve other gods, which neither you nor your fathers have known, wood and stone." And Jeremiah said, "He will also scatter them among the nations, whom neither they nor their fathers have known." And it's just a recurring theme. So the Romans destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD, and again the Jews were scattered throughout the world. Then the theme in several places in the Bible is, despite that scattering, there's going to be a massive regathering of Israel. So both Isaiah and Ezekiel prophesied that Israel will be regathered in the last days. Okay. So Ezekiel says, "Then say to them, thus saith the Lord, surely I will take the children of Israel from among the nations, wherever they have gone, and will gather them from every side and bring them to their own land." And Isaiah said, "It shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand against, again, the second time, to recover the remnant of his people who are left, from Assyria and Egypt, Athros, Cush, from Elam, from around the world, from islands of the sea. He will set a banner for the nations and will assemble the outcasts of Jerusalem, of Israel rather, and will gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth." So and Amos again said the same thing. He was a prophet 2,700 years ago, and he said, "I will bring back my exiled people. They will rebuild the ruined cities and live in them. I will plant vineyards, and I will plant Israel in their own land, never again to be uprooted from the land I have given them." And just again, Ezekiel received a vision from Israel, in which he saw a vast boneyard of dried up bones. And his vision, God says to Ezekiel that the bones should be brought back to life, and he wants him to prophesy about it. So Ezekiel said, "I prophesied as he commanded, and breath entered them, and they came to life." And then he said, "Son of man, those bones are the whole house of Israel. They say, our bones are dried up, and our hope is gone. We are cut off. Therefore prophesy to them. This is what the sovereign Lord says. O my people, I'm going to open your graves and bring you up from them. I will bring you back to the land of Israel. I will put my spirit in you and settle you in your own land again." So that's a recurring theme. Isaiah had another interesting prophecy. He said, "Therefore she goes into labor. She gives birth before the pains come upon her. She delivers a son. Who has ever heard of such a thing? Who has ever seen such things? Can a country be born in one day, or a nation be brought forth in a moment? Yet no sooner is Zion in labor than she gives birth to her children." Consensus is that's referring to the formation in one day of the state of Israel in 1948. And what's even more amazing, come on. Well, okay. So is it Ezekiel's prophecy of the regathering? And it turns out that the year was predicted exactly by Ezekiel. Okay, so Ezekiel said that the Jews were to be punished for 430 years because they had turned away from God as part of the punishment. The Jews were exiled to Babylon. Okay, so from the start of the exile to the time when the punishment would end was going to be 430 years. Okay. So Babylon was conquered, was later conquered by Cyrus in 539, who allowed the Jews to return. Okay, so that's the end of the 70 years. But it turned out that only a very small number of the Jews wanted to go back to Israel. And that was viewed as a sin by God. So because most of the exiles chose to stay in Babylon rather than return to the Holy Land, the remaining 360 years of the punishment was multiplied by 7. That's from Leviticus. It says, if after all this you will not listen to me, I will punish you for your sins 7 times over. Okay. So if you take the remaining 360 years of the punishment and multiply by 7, you get 2,520 years. But those Old Testament years were lunar years, 360-day calendar years. So if you make them solar years, it winds up being 2,484. And if you subtract 2,000, go up 2484 years from 536 BC, you get 1948. Okay. Now there are other people that have even gone further, and they've taken days and calculated, and they wind up with May 25th, I believe, which was the exact day. So, pretty incredible. I mean, to me, just the fact that it predicts the year so solidly is amazing. So now we're going to move on to the Dead Sea Scrolls. And this is probably one of the most important biblically related events in history. Because 2 very strong things happened because of the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. One was, it was conclusively shown that a lot of the messianic prophecies, especially in Isaiah and some others, were not written after the fact, like so many skeptics soon tried to say, because the Dead Sea Scrolls, which we're going to see, which were written well before the coming of Jesus, have exactly the same words in them as the ones as we know today, and they were not possibly written afterwards. And the other thing that's found is the Dead Sea Scrolls have major parts of the Bible that were written 11 to 1200 years before what was previously the oldest known Bible copy. So the Masoretic text was around 1100 AD, and the new text that was found on the Dead Sea Scrolls were 1200 years, roughly 1200 years older. And what they found was, when they compared them word for word, there was essentially no difference. And we're going to show that the reason for that was because of the rules they followed in copying the text. So we're going to go through that.